Good afternoon and welcome. Hi, I'm Steve Jewell with Community Giving. We're glad to have you with us today. I'm going to give everybody a few minutes to get into the room before we get started here. So we appreciate you spending your noon hour with us and taking time out of your day to be here. So we'll give just a few minutes for people to get into the room. Hope everybody's having a great day. Okay, I think we're gonna just probably get started, and we do have a number of people joining us today. Plus, we also know, as we've done with these webinars in the past, that we have a number of people who do register, who don't always show up, but they appreciate getting the recorded version of this afterwards. And so please note that if you do have to step away, that this is being recorded and we will have this available later. So again, welcome. I'm Steve Jewell with Community Giving. We have been doing these webinars ever since the start of COVID and the stay-at-home order. Just like many of you, trying to stay in touch with audiences that are important to our work, and in particular, our professional advisors, our partners who we work with to promote and support donors and support philanthropy in all the communities that we serve. We have a series of webinars we're going to be doing this spring, kicking off today. And as we talked about this internally, about what topics, it became apparent that we have heard from other professionals at times just wondering, how do we work with the Community Foundation? And what does that all entail? And especially those professionals who maybe haven't had experience or the opportunity to work with their local community foundation. So that's why we wanted to have an opportunity today to simply feature our executive directors who each lead various community foundations that we serve, and give them an opportunity to share their insights and their experience. So today it's going to be first, we're going to feature our 4 executive directors talking. If you have questions, please feel free to just put those questions in the Q&A. And we'll get to them after we've had this initial presentation. We did have a few of our executive directors who were going to be taking vacation this week, actually trying to put down the computer and stay away from their computers, which we wanted to respect and honor. So the first segment here is going to be a recording. Right afterwards, though, we have both Carl Samp and Carol Turnow here live, and they will be fielding your questions. So I want to introduce this wonderful, incredible team of executive directors. If we added up all their years of community foundation experience, I know it's well over 100 years worth of community foundation experience. Each of them are great leaders in their own right in their local communities and are really there 110% to help support donors, nonprofits, and the communities that they serve. So we're delighted to have with us Holly Witt, the Executive Director of the Alexandria Community Foundation, Carol Turnow, Executive Director of the Central Minnesota Community Foundation, Carl Samp, Executive Director of the Brainerd Lakes Area Community Foundation, and Sarah Carlson, Executive Director of the Wilmer Area Community Foundation. And the format we're going to use is that we're going to first start with a basic overview of the Community Foundation. Carl will lead off. Then Carol will be talking about what do people give to their local community foundation. Holly will provide an example of how you actually work with the foundation in setting up a fund and how that process works. And then Sarah is going to provide some information about the support that happens once a donor is a relationship already with the Community Foundation, and of course, with you as a professional advisor. Once again, thank you so much for being here. We're going to move forward with this presentation and then follow up with questions and answers here shortly after it's finished. If you have questions, put them in Q&A. But first, I want to kick off with Carl Samp.
Start by talking a little bit about what is a community foundation. We're all 501c3 charitable nonprofit organizations. We all host a variety of charitable funds for individuals, families, businesses, and nonprofit organizations. And we provide an alternative to individuals or families setting up a private foundation, like a family foundation. Another thing we all do is we make grants to nonprofit organizations, school districts, and local units of government. We can do that both through the advised funds of our donors or our own unrestricted funds, where our board makes a decision on what grants to make. For instance, last year, Brainerd Lakes Area Community Foundation, we decided on about 100,000 in grants, and our donor advised funds were, and other advised funds were more like 800,000 in funds. So you can get an idea of the kind of the ratio of that. We all, for the funds that we make out into our community from our board, it's all based on the priorities for each community and what our specific needs are. Another thing that we all do is provide community leadership and convening around specific issues pertinent to our community. So once again, in Brainerd, we've been working on issues around workforce. How do we attract, retain, develop a workforce? Part of that also includes how do we create a welcoming communities for new people moving to our community for going to work. One way we differ from the large commercial charities like Fidelity, Vanguard, et cetera, even though they do provide a lower fee than we do, we provide that individualized, personalized concierge service, much like you as professional advisors provide, as compared to Ameritrade, Rocket Lawyer, or TurboTax. So once again, you get that professionalized service for your clients by working through us. Another thing that we want to share is how we listen to clients, and it's much like you do, I think. We both want to know, what good do you want to do with your wealth as a client, for your quality of life and your retirement, for your heirs, for your church, for your community. And so when we're working with the client, we'll ask, when we start talking about what charitable giving goals that they have, it might be questions like, what keeps you up at night? What gives you hope for your community and causes? And we can help you with that. So those are the types of things we would talk about with your clients. Then when we start talking about the types of funds we can establish, there would be donor advised funds or corporate advised funds. Donor advised funds would be individuals and families. Corporate advised funds would be for businesses. And in those cases, the fund is established, and each year the donors make the decisions, or at least they recommend grants they would like to see funded from their charitable fund. And then we will do due diligence on that and see that those grants are made as long as it's an eligible organization. Another type of fund is a designated fund. That's where the charities are established at the same time the fund is set up. So it would be the same charities getting the gifts each year. That's often the type of fund established in a planned gift or an estate gift, where they establish who they'd like to see those grants given to every year. We also have field of interest funds. Those are where grants are made to a specific type of cause. So we have, for instance, women's funds. We have funds related to trails, parks, playgrounds, things like that would all be examples. We even have one for dogs in Brainerd. Those are all examples of field of interest funds. Donors can also set up scholarship funds where they establish the criteria that's going to be made, but they can't pick specific students. They can be in on that decision-making, but they have to be a minority in that decision-making process. We also have agency funds for nonprofit organizations where they can park cash reserves or maybe have an endowment fund where people gift to. In those cases, and most often, those agencies maintain the access to the funds. And finally, we have what's called unrestricted funds, which are gifts made to the foundation for our board to decide how those are best used. So I would say these are for people who have a great passion for their community. Maybe it's been very good to them and they want to give back in general to the community. And knowing that our board will be able to respond to current needs of the community on into the future. So, and those are what we make most of our grants from, are those unrestricted funds. Finally, I'm going to talk about payout options. And those payout options generally happen in one of two ways, either through an endowed fund, where it's a percentage of the fund given out every year, either that we establish as the endowed payout rate, or they can set up an annual payout rate of 5% or less. And those are treated like endowed funds. and it has a slightly lower fee than a flexible fund. A flexible fund is where the donor can pay out any or all of that fund at any time, and that has a slightly higher fee to it because the fund could go away quicker and we're likely making more checks from that. But those are the two ways that folks can decide to pay out funds. Thank you.
Thanks, Carl. So we're going to talk a little bit about what kind of assets we can take as gifts. And so we really count on our partnerships with professional advisors. You're the ones who sit down with your clients and look at what they have and help them determine what is the best choice for giving. And I know that's essentially so important during estate planning to determine what is happening, what are you giving to your family, that doesn't cause a tax situation for them, or how do you give the most value to family and to charity for that matter. So of course we always accept gifts of cash. So those are the easy gifts for us. And we have a great system for being able to record those, and all gifts that we receive do get a tax acknowledgement sent to the donors then. There often is confusion for donors as far as when they get that tax deduction, especially for donor advised funds. So when they make a gift to their donor advised fund, that's when they get, it's considered a taxable gift. When they make a distribution from that fund and give it to the end nonprofit, that is not a tax deductible gift. And so anytime you can clarify that with your clients, that helps us too, and helps them to get a little bit more clarity. So in addition to cash, we have stock gifts are probably our next most popular gift that we receive. Of course, you know that the bonus to giving stock gifts is that you can give it at an appreciated value, and that's what the tax receipt is based on. And they avoid having to pay tax, capital gains tax on that appreciation then. So it's a nice gift that many people are using. We have done some closely held stock as well. Typically, our policy is that when we receive stock, we immediately sell it, cash it out. But like I said, with closely held, sometimes those situations are different. And we're really trying to be flexible to be able to be as supportive as we can for our donors to make gifts. In addition to cash and stock, we have real estate gifts. Real estate, again, is one of those things that you can give and avoid paying the tax on that appreciated value. When it comes to real estate gifts, we do have our real estate foundation that is able to go through a list of criteria to make sure that it is a suitable gift so that the donor reaps the benefits of that. In addition to real estate, we have gifts of life insurance that can be given as well. And we also have had some unique things coming up lately. Bitcoin has been introduced to us. We haven't actually done a gift with Bitcoin, but we know it's coming. We also, just this past week with Central Minnesota Community Foundation, had someone who wanted to give an annuity to us. So that, again, can be done. We're not sure that there's any tax benefit for that. But one of the things that we want you to know is that when questions like that come up, we ask them to go back to their CPA, their financial advisor, their lawyer, and find out whether or not it's the right gift for them to make. So we consider you to be a very important partner for us. There's a lot of different ways that donors can give as far as planned giving. So the most direct way is a will. They can just put a bequest in there stating what they would like to give. It can be a specific item. It can be a specific dollar amount. It could be a percentage. It could be a remainder interest. So there's a lot of flexibility there. We count on our attorneys to be able to help them to determine that language, and we're available to give you the information that you need from CommunityGiving then. We also have trusts and annuities. So charitable gift annuities have become a little bit more popular with the interest rates being lower. So we do have some people that take advantage of that. We also have those people who are interested in charitable remainder trusts. So you know the difference between a charitable gift annuity is that that gift is given in time. If they were to make another gift, there would be a separate charitable gift annuity. A trust would allow them to keep adding assets to the same trust as they go along. So those are just a few of the gifts. I do want to get a little bit more into real estate in the fact that real estate can be given as a transfer on death, set up that way. It can be an outright gift. It can be used to fund a charitable trust. You could do a bargain sale, retained life interest. So there's so many different ways that a gift can be made. And one of the complications we know for you is how do you communicate how this will look for a client? And if you're looking for illustrations on that, we do have a great spot on our website. If you go to communitygiving.org and go under donors, you'll find a place there that talks about planned gifts, and you can actually enter in an example, and it does a nice illustration of how that gift is processed, what portion is taxable, what portion would be available to them as a deduction. And then when it comes to case of annuities or trusts, what amount would come back annually to the donor or their beneficiary for that. So many of you are recommending to donors, and it is a perfect gift, the retirement gifts. But an IRA, as you know, by rules of the IRS, cannot go to a donor advised fund. But we do accept IRA gifts for designated funds. So the difference there is a donor advised fund is one where they can make recommendations. They put money into the fund, and then as they want, they make a recommendation. A designated fund specifies in the fund agreement what nonprofits the money will be distributed to. And so what we try to do with a designated fund so that they can keep using their IRA distributions year after year is talk about who are some of those core nonprofits that you want to give to, and then set it up as a percentage so that when you make your gift then annually, it will just automatically be distributed out to those charities. But if a donor wants to change that, then what they need to do is the next year set up a new designated fund, and they can make changes as to the distributions for it. So a required minimum distribution is often, as you know, an advantage to be made as a qualified charitable deduction because it is not taxed or listed as taxable income for them, nor do they take the charitable deduction for it. That can be a hard thing for your clients to understand because they're used to making a contribution and then taking it on their tax return. But we do a special letter for those clients to make sure that they understand that this was a QCD or not a QCD, so that the accountant knows how to handle that gift then. So I'm going to turn it over now to Holly to talk a little bit more.
All right, thanks, Carol. So Carol talked a little bit about our relationship with you, the professional advisors, accountants, and attorneys, and how important the relationship is to us, because most of the funds that we set up actually do come through advisors. And so what I'm going to do is just walk through setting up a donor advised fund and how we do that with an advisor. So first of all, obviously we need to know you, we need to have relationship with you, and we spend a lot of time cultivating those relationships because we want to work together. And so what typically happens is as you're working with your client, they're charitable. They want to give back to the community. They want to give to nonprofits. And so you make the connection with us. And so that's what's happened in the case of donor advised funds I've set up. I get a call from an advisor and they have a client that's charitable, but also typically looking for some kind of a tax benefit. Often they can happen anytime during the year, but my experience has been toward the end of the year when they're thinking about their tax situation. And so what we'll do is you would facilitate the meeting. We go in and we sit down with your client and really talk about what their goals are, what they want to accomplish. And so we learn about their needs, their wants, their passions, and how they want to give back. And so we basically then just facilitate the contract. It's pretty simple. We meet then with the donor and we just go through an intake. We get the basic information on the client, and then it's just information about the fund, the type of fund. In this case, a donor advised fund, how they want to invest it. There's options on how they can invest. And so we'll walk through that with the client. And then basically we just take that information and we create a fund. It's a fund agreement. It's a 2-page agreement. And then we get together with the donor, have them sign the agreement. Throughout this process, the initial contact, we typically go through the advisor, through you. And then from that point on, we just work with the client. It's up to the advisor how involved you want to be. But once you make the initial contact, we just walk through the process with the client, taking care of their needs, setting up the fund, getting their signatures. And then once the fund is set up, then money is transferred. And so Carol talked about with, for example, a donor advised fund, cash or appreciated stock. And so we facilitate that if it's appreciated stock and it's coming through the advisor, through the client's funds, we help with that. So where to send the funds and how that's all done. So we help facilitate that. And we try to make this process as easy as possible. And then what happens when the fund is set up? A welcome packet is sent to the client, and then they know how to access their fund. And then we're here to answer questions, and just any questions they have about, where they might want to give. Most donors and most clients who are setting up these funds have a pretty good idea, if they're philanthropic, where they'd like their dollars to go. They have passions and they have places that they want to give. If not, that's something we can help with. And I believe, Sarah, you're going to talk maybe a little bit more about that. But we really tried, our role in working with you as advisors is to really help your client and make this an easy process to set up these funds. But we do need you to help facilitate it and introduce us to your clients who are philanthropic and have these kinds of needs. So I think with that, if any of my colleagues have anything to add, because I'm the newest and I've got some pretty seasoned folks here who've been through more of this than I have. So if there's anything I missed that you'd like to add, feel free to chime in.
I will add that at Central Minnesota Community Foundation, especially during that crunch time in December, we have had times where we have given the donor interview form to the professional advisor so that they can walk through that form with their client and then just give it to us. We do a draft of it. Ideally, we want to be able to sit down with that client because it is going to be an ongoing relationship, but we know that sometimes the relationship that you have with them and the trust that they have in you is so important to them. So we can have the option too of sitting down with the client, yourself, and us.
I'll just add too that you do have that relationship with the client, but know that professional advisors who do talk to their clients about their charitable giving goals, 74% of clients state that they have a stronger relationship with those professional advisors that do that. Mm-hmm. And professional advisors who do talk to their clients about charitable goals get 60% more referrals. And that data comes from the 2018 U.S. Trust Survey.
Right, Carl. I think what we have certainly shown in evidence is that the relationship, our job, is to take the hard-fought relationship that you've established with each of your clients and then bring that into the philanthropic arena and extend that relationship with our staff. So that's always been our goal. One of the biggest questions we often get is how quickly can we get that fund up and running? So Carol has mentioned, and so did Holly, the ways that we can get that happening, and sometimes we can even leapfrog it and have you get started on that process while we're working with another donor. But usually we can have a charitable fund set up and running within a matter of days, so that we can match up an asset that you would have in transit, and the fund can be ready to go. But we do invite you to ask us into the relationship that you have with your client. That is when the most seamless service will happen between you as the advisor and them as the client, now donor with us at the Community Foundation. So a little bit more about how do we support your client once they become our donor and have established a fund. So we assist, as Carl mentioned at the beginning of our presentation, with what we call concierge level service. We know that not every donor requires the same level of hands-on assistance. Some are very autonomous. Some want more support from the staff here at the Community Foundation. So we do not have a one-size-fits-all approach to how we handle donors. We assist them in the ways that are important to them. But there are some basic levels of support that we put in place for everyone. One is called our Donor Central platform, and that is a 24/7, 365-day-a-year online portal for donors so that they can do some basic functionality regarding their fund. They can see their last available fund balance for the quarter or the month preceding. They can see their grant making history that they've used their fund for, and they can think, oh, what was that grant that I made last year? It will be inside our Donor Central system for them so that they can actually just pull that grant forward and renew it if that is their intention. They can also recommend a grant right inside our system. So they just need some basic information about the charity that they want to benefit. And then our team takes that and does all of the due diligence that is necessary to ensure that the grants that we are making are actually compliant by IRS standards for qualified charities, and that the fund has adequate resources to make the gift, those kinds of things. One of the best parts, I think, inside the work that we do as a foundation is that in that concierge level work, we can protect their identity. If they want a grant to be anonymous, they can do a specific grant that's anonymous, and then the rest can be known. Or every grant can be anonymous. We will work with them to achieve their goals and to make it comfortable for them, because we want them to trust the relationship they are building with us. And so we understand how to do that, and we'll engage you as their professional advisor whenever we feel we need some additional support regarding a new gift into a fund, or if there's a particularly tax advantaged time that might be pertinent for your client, we would engage with you. But mostly at that point, we will be working directly with the donor. Our grants that your donors would recommend are usually processed within 7 days, and grants go all across the country. We actually even do international grant making as long as there is a US-based intermediary. So you shouldn't worry that a grant or a fund set up with us here at your local community foundation can't accomplish your donors' national grant making or worldwide grant making goals. We can do that. We do it every day. And so again, we're happy to chat with your donors and actually even do the due diligence on the charitable gifts that they are interested in making to ensure that we can do that work for them. Very common that we would see grants going to support their faith communities or faith-based organizations, community nonprofits, colleges, universities, hospitals, institutions where your clients may have a charitable history. They support schools and cities, and some of the work that Carl mentioned earlier about specific fields of interest or community level projects. And that is actually a really great transition to the third thing that we do at the Community Foundation inside that concierge level service. We actually try and survey or get to know your clients who become our donors and know their interests, because then the executive directors can give them a call if there's a project or a need in the community that aligns with what is their passion. We can give them an opportunity to participate or not participate in a project. We do some specific outreach to our donors as well in the form of bus tours, sometimes now in the pandemic, virtual engagement opportunities to educate our donors about needs that are present in the community and ways that they can assist. We do follow-up visits with our donors at periodic levels to determine, have their charitable needs changed? What are they thinking about for some new gifting? Have they got a legacy gift in mind? In which case we may need to tag in different levels of advisors to assist us in executing that charitable intention on behalf of your client. Your community foundation knows what your community needs, and we can assist in many ways by giving them direction, opportunities, letting them know when there's a match moment where their gift could leverage additional dollars, or if there's something that's percolating in the community where a little bit of an upstart could be helpful from some of our established donors. So you should know that that is what we will do when we take the reins of the relationship that you trust us with, your client who becomes our donor. I think at this point, we are going to have a few of us be available to you for live Q&A. We want to thank you for listening to us, and we look forward to answering your questions.
Well, wonderful. Thank you to Carol, Carl, Sarah, and Holly. And now I'd like you to welcome, we have Carol Turnow, Executive Director of Central Minnesota Community Foundation with us, as well as Carl Stamp, the Executive Director of the Brainerd Lakes Area Community Foundation. I think Carl is here. And we're going to have a little chance to ask them some questions. And I have gotten a few questions that have come in, and I have a few here as well. But I think Carol will maybe kick off with you in that, you know, if you're a professional advisor and you want to get involved, get to know more about the Community Foundation, as well as maybe even volunteer, how do you get connected? How do you get involved to work with the local Community Foundation?
That's a great question, Steve. And we do have those opportunities. We have a Professional Advisors Council that gets together 4 or 5 times a year to be able to discuss common interests. And that can range from something that's philanthropic to tax issues. In addition to that, we're always looking for volunteers for our scholarship committees, our grant committee. We also have some initiatives like our Women's Fund and Good Samaritan that we use volunteers for on those boards as well. In addition to that, Community Giving often looks for our professional advisors to help with the finance or the investment committee. So if you have an interest in any of those things, let us know and we'll see how we can connect you. In addition to that, I'll just say that if you're looking for a broader scope, a lot of times we're aware of other nonprofits that are looking for board members as well. And so we're happy to make those connections.
Wonderful. Thanks, Carol. So they should just probably reach out directly to their local community foundation leader. If they're in Brainerd, Carl, connect with Carl, or in St. Cloud area with you, Carol. Is that the best way?
Absolutely. Okay. Yes.
Wonderful. Great. How about, you know, another question with regard to if a professional has a client and that client doesn't have any direct heirs or children, what, you know, Carl, how would you work with that particular family and individual in accomplishing their charitable goals?
Well, once again, if the professional advisor is having that conversation and knowing that they don't have any children or heirs, that's a great time to ask that charitable goal question, because those are often families who want to leave some sort of legacy for their future based on a planned gift. So, you know, they can just talk about, you know, with their estate. Is there a percentage of that you would like to see go to charities, to some charitable cause or causes? And with that, you could introduce them to us and we can start talking about how we can best support them with that. They can do that by, you know, putting something in their will or in a trust, or they could potentially also name the foundation as a beneficiary of a retirement fund. Just can't go into a donor advised fund in that situation, but you know, it could go in a designated gift out to their favorite charity or causes. So yeah, so just once again, bring us into the picture and we can start talking about the options the family might have and work with you and them on that.
So if the money came in then to the local community foundation and it didn't have any charitable interest necessarily named, then how would the foundation go about, what would they do with that money? And how would they go about possibly getting it to charities?
Well, if it would come in, you know, going then into our unrestricted fund, And from that, we do our grant making. So our board determines what the priorities of our community are at that particular point in time. So there are donors who just prefer to do that, knowing that, hey, this, my fund's going to go on forever and needs are going to change over time. And, we think your board is going to have a pulse on the community and what particular issues are that they're facing then. And so then we can respond to that on their behalf.
So that's great, Carl. So are there some examples, maybe each of you could share some examples of what the foundations have done with those unrestricted dollars, or how you've made those decisions and where they've gone in the community?
Sure. We have our Difference Maker grant round. It's a competitive grant round that we have every year. So this year, while in the past, it has been on economy, education, and building social capital have been kind of our focus then. So we invite nonprofits to apply, and then our grants committee, which is made up of people in our community that are representative of the community, so volunteers, read through those applications and determine what they believe to be the best fits. So each year we look at our Difference Maker guidelines and base it on what the emerging needs are. Education and economy seem to be pretty year to year, but there may be special interests that we add to that as well. So examples would be Yes Network, for instance, was one that we did a grant for. So this is a kind of like a Boys and Girls Club, except this program is taken to the apartment complexes for those kids who don't have transportation to be able to go to those activities. Another example is the Great River Children's Museum is something that's being established here in our community. So money was given to them to help with the planning for that.
Great.
And I'll share one example here too. So early on in our existence, late 90s, one of our founding board members had no children, and she left a substantial unrestricted gift. And it really helped our foundation get off the ground and provided some dollars for staffing through that as well. But we also have been doing our grant making from that fund, from the earnings of that fund. One of the things we supported about 5 years ago was to start creating a plan for the Brainerd Riverfront. It runs right through our community. I think Baxter's got kind of some of the longest frontage feet in the state of the Mississippi River. But we really didn't have anything really attractive down there. So we made a 3-year grant for about $99,000 to the city to create a plan for the future of that riverfront. And what came of that was the Brainerd Riverfront Trailhead Park, where the Cuyuna Trail will come over, meet the Paul Bunyan Trail, go on up to the Heartland Trail, all the way up to Bemidji. So it creates this great network and hub for trails, but it'll also be a place that's going to have a nice amphitheater, a place for pavilion for food trucks and vendors and things to come in. And it's going through the legislative process right now. We've been recommended for $2.85 million now to take those plans now and create them into reality.
Wow.
So, it's going to be a difference maker for the Brainerd Lakes community. So
it's a great example of a small amount of money initially really helping create a much bigger effect and leveraging other resources to have an impact in the local community. And yeah, great. And similar even with the support of the Children's Museum, another example of triggering others to get on board and support. Now, if you happen to live in, say, Sauk Center or in say Cold Spring, does that money just go to St. Cloud, or where can I get it? Is that money, can that be distributed by my local community foundation in those local communities?
Yes, our Sauk Center has a community foundation, and so does Cold Spring is under the Ricori Community Foundation. Those all sit underneath the Central Minnesota Community Foundation, but they are all led by a local advisory committee then.
Sure. So I see they put up a wonderful map that shows all the various local community foundations that we work with. And so technically they could, in essence, support any of these communities. And some of the communities, if they didn't have one, they could actually even start one. Is that correct? That's something.
Yeah, if we've got anybody from Nisswa here who would love to see a Nisswa community fund, we'd love to help you get that started.
Yep. And we know that in the Carver County area, Chaska is in the process of finalizing a community fund there. So we know that there's lots of great volunteers making those kind of things happen. Well, Carl, you mentioned a little bit about the differences between a donor advised fund with your local community foundation versus, say, like Fidelity or Vanguard. Could you expound just a little bit more about, why would, anyone of a local professional want to partner with their local community foundation when it can be so easy and convenient with those large national firms?
Sure, a couple great reasons. As I said, the large firms tend to have a lower fee, and part of that is because they've invested a lot of money in automating their systems so that they don't have to be personalized. And so, they have kind of taken the personal touch out of that process. And as I said, it would be very comparable to a rocket lawyer, doing a will for you versus working with an estate attorney, or, TD Ameritrade instead of working with a professional advisor, So it takes that personal touch out of it and that connection. The other thing I think that's really important is the whole buy local concept. Any fees that come into us, they go to support the operations of the foundation, which is primarily staff. We spend our money right back in this community, in the Brainerd Lakes area community. Our foundation, when we're buying supplies and things like that, we're buying from our local community. We're shopping locally here as much as possible. And so those dollars just get reinvested right back into the community. We also tend to encourage, as Sarah was talking about, encourage our donors to get involved in local charities and opportunities that are happening locally. So one thing that we've really tried to do and we've seen is a greater shift away from national grant making from some donors to supporting more and more local initiatives. And once again, every one of those grant dollars that goes out to a local nonprofit in your community ends back up in the business community and very likely into your clients' funds with you. So it's just keeping those dollars locally rotating around our community.
Great, thanks, Carl. Well, as you think about that and the donor advised funds and how popular they've become, there has been some people who maybe rightfully been critical of those donor advised funds, of just holding on to the money and just trying to build lots of dollars sitting in the bank. And what do you say to that, Carol, as far as from your perspective, when you hear that, or Carl, either one of you, how do you respond to that?
I think it's a misconception, and it has to do with the fact that there is such huge popularity in donor advised funds. And it's very similar to private foundations. Private foundations, people are allowed to put their assets into a private foundation and get a charitable gift for it. But a private foundation requires them to spend 5% each year. A donor advised fund does not have a percentage tied to it. So there's this concept that as donor advised funds are growing, that those assets are being held and not expended. But we find at our foundation, and actually nationally, it's around 15% that's paid out of a donor advised fund each year. So that's a huge difference for compared to private foundations. And so I think that people just don't realize the impact that is happening with donor advised funds.
So
I know the Minnesota Council on Foundations just did a survey of, I think, 9 community foundations in Minnesota, and I think it was 20% is what they averaged on the annual payout from those donor advised funds. So, pretty substantial going back into the community, into the economy.
So, I would imagine then when they have a local contact to even assist them, like each of you, that sometimes helps donors decide to maybe even make larger gifts or give more money out to some when they get to know what's happening in their local community.
And we do some things at CommunityGiving too to help to make sure that those dollars do go out. In that, if we find that there's a donor advised fund that isn't active, we're checking in with that donor, giving them some suggestions of ways to use that money. all of our donor advised funds have a succession plan on them. So a donor, when they are no longer living, if there's money left in that fund, they either can designate a successor advisor. It could be switched over to a designated fund and pay out specifically to nonprofits that they care about, or it can be turned over to the foundation and we can then grant that out in our general dollars. So there's a lot of options, and we're very cognizant of the fact that those dollars were given to support charity, and we want to make sure that that happens.
Great.
I do have one donor who they want their children to be able to be philanthropists. So they are reserving some of those dollars for their children to give out. And they're just continuing to do their donations from their annual income. But once again, they've gotten so much joy from this as a family. They want their children to be able to support their favorite causes too, in case they're not as well off as the parents are.
Great. You know, I hear about this question at times too, but I'd like maybe one or both of you to comment. You know, you have community giving, and then you have your local community foundation, and you know what's the connection, and how do I work with one or the other?
Carl, you want to take that, or do you want me to?
Well, sure. Community giving provides support to all the foundations. So we're much like a cooperative, I guess you'd say, in that we all share human resource costs, accounting and finance, grants administration, marketing services, some event planning and things of that nature. And I know I'm missing some real key ones, but we all share those costs so that locally in Brainerd, all I really need to focus on are those three things of, donor relations and fund development, grant making, and community leadership and convening. I'm not doing all those other things that, would require either more of me or additional people. So
it does help to keep our costs down, and it's much more efficient. It's also a model. When Carver County recently joined us, it's a model that can be expanded. So for those community foundations that are looking for advice on how to grow, it's great to be a part of an organization that has established experiences that can share that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and like Steve said, we have a lot of community foundation experience here, and Steve probably the most. So we have that team to draw on from all across all our communities. And when one community develops something cool, it's shared with everybody, it's that collective wisdom that exists in the organization.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Carl. I think one of the things that's been so nice to see is the sharing of all of you as executive directors, as well as board members. The board members from each community talking with each other, learning about what programs are working in their community, and sometimes them adopting it in another community or marketing idea, whatever it is, that sharing and support of one another. And our board chair, Bruce Polig, came up with and pushed our board at Community Giving to come up with strategic intent, which was really what are we all about, and at Community Giving. And he said it came down to empowering community foundations, and really empowering community foundations to help them do great work in their communities, which all of you are doing. And it's fun to see the impact that each local community foundation can have in their local community. What would be some last words of advice that you might have for a professional advisor as far as just how they can continue to serve their clients better in the area of charitable giving, and how you can support them?
Well, I get to say, I've got one of the best jobs in the world. I get to help generous people change lives and communities through philanthropy. And, it's an honor. I'll just give one story. We had a donor that had a fund with us, a couple did, got a call late 2019. They were down in Florida, and his wife was not doing well at all. And in fact, they knew she was going to pass shortly, and they wanted to establish a fund in her memory. And I think that first contact came in on Tuesday. And by Thursday, we had a signed fund agreement with them, met with their accountant, and by Friday, the funds were transferred and the fund was established. She actually picked the types of things she wanted to support in her memory, and she passed away that Saturday. So within 4 days, we created this fund for her that in her name, that her name and her legacy will live on in the Brainerd community through her generosity. So she just kept on doing what she did her whole life in her passing.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thanks, Carl. Carol?
I would say, for community foundations are such a resource for what's really going on in our community, what the needs are. So this past December, I had a person come in who needed to make several distributions. They had a large dollar amount that they needed to give away because of tax complications. And they really didn't know who to give it to. Now that wasn't something that was coming through the foundation at all. It was going to be paid out directly to the nonprofits to suit their tax needs. But they came to us because they knew that we would know areas that need money. And so what I did is sit down with them and talk about what his desires were, and actually went through a list of different nonprofits, gave him a little background about what those things were doing, and helped him to determine, shared the information, and then he determined where that money should go. And that was such an honor to be able to help someone do that. I've kind of gotten over the shock of the fact of receiving gifts, but to be able to help them distribute gifts was just an ultimate new experience for me, and a great one.
Wonderful. Thanks, Carol, and thanks, Carl. Lots of great stories, and we know that within each community foundation, there are just, lots and lots of wonderful stories of lots of good that's happened thanks to these generous donors, as well as the great work that each of you as executive directors do and ways you connect the donors with the local community. So it's wonderful to see. And I should, just as a reminder to all who are on this call, that every community we work with set up a response fund once the pandemic hit. And each of them had local donors give to that fund. Some other donations came from a statewide initiative, and I don't know the exact total. I think it was around $700,000-800,000 at least that went out into the communities, thanks to the response funds set up in each community. So it was nice that every community foundation was prepared to be able to do that with the pandemic. We started these webinar series as just, again, we had never done a webinar before COVID, and we've all learned how to now Zoom and stay in contact. And we hope to continue to do that and be in contact with all of you going forward over the next series of months. Hopefully soon we'll be able to be in person. But next month on March 9th, we'll be talking about the rural Minnesota brain gain. We have some wonderful speakers who will be talking about that when our Community Connections webinar on March 9th. And then on March 25th, we'll continue these webinars specifically for professional advisors on corporate advised funds. Some of our local community foundations now have continued to do a great job working with local businesses and corporations in setting up what we call corporate advised funds and assist with their corporate giving. I just want to thank the wonderful team of executive directors we have. We have just a phenomenal group of people to work with, and Holly and Sarah, Carol and Carl. They all are available at any time you have any questions to just reach out to them and ask them questions. Even if you don't live in their community, they're great resources. But we always encourage contact your local leader first. Myself and others at CommunityGiving are also always available to help and support you in any way. Our email, if you have some comments or feedback about today's webinar, or if you have ideas for additional topics, you can email us at info@communitygiving.org. We greatly appreciate all the wonderful work you do as advisors, working with your clients and helping them make a difference in their local communities. Without you, our work would not exist. And so know that we're here simply as a resource to support you in your good work. Thank you again. Have a wonderful day. and hope to see you on March 25th for our next webinar on corporate advised funds.